Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The coup came closer to succeeding than we ever knew. And we know that Donald Trump plotted with his associates to overturn American democracy. He tried everything he could to keep himself in power over the will of the people. And day by day, we have been learning more and more about how comprehensive and how dangerous that effort was. But we did not learn the details of the single most damning piece of evidence yet until yesterday. And frankly, I have to say, it's so damning and so unnerving, I've spent the last 24 hours scratching my head in disbelief that it is not a bigger story. Because the document we learned about yesterday should live in infamy in American history as a truly villainous text. And if the acting attorney general at the time had signed that document, it would have likely thrown the United States into the worst constitutional crisis since the Civil War, may have precipitated actual civil strife and violence. The document was drafted by this man, a man you should know. Jeffrey Clark is his name. He is, in a million different ways, unremarkable. The kind of functionary lawyer that exists in droves in Washington, D.C. He went to a good law school. He worked in a big corporate firm, Kirkland & Ellis. He worked in the George W. Bush administration, went back to Kirkland & Ellis, came back to the Justice Department in 2018. In September of 2020, he was put in charge of the DOJ's Civil Division. New York Times reported that in December, as acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and his deputy, Richard Donoghue, were pushing back on Trump's attempts to use the Justice Department to undermine the election, they were unaware that Mr. Clark, Jeffrey Clark, had been introduced to President Trump by a Pennsylvania politician, and that Clark had told the president he agreed that fraud had affected the election results. Basically, he auditioned before the president and let him know that he would be willing to be the trigger man for Donald Trump in his attempt to kill off American democracy in its present form. And that is not hyperbole. Clark met with Trump. He schemed with Trump, and he drafted the document I talked about, this letter. It's a letter to the Georgia governor, the Speaker of the House, and the President pro tem of the Senate. And it's drafted for Rosen and Donoghue to sign, officially from the U.S. Department of Justice. It says in part, the Department of Justice is investigating various irregularities in the 2020 election for President of the United States. At this time, we have identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. While the Department of Justice believes the governor of Georgia should immediately call a special session to consider this important and urgent matter, if he declines to do so, we share with you our view that the Georgia General Assembly has implied authority under the Constitution of the United States to call itself into special session for the limited purpose of considering issues pertaining to the appointment of presidential electors. Basically, Clark and Trump teaming up spell out what they want. They want the acting attorney general and his deputy to publicly state the election in Georgia was too tainted by fraud to be trusted, and that the Georgia General Assembly needed to use the power entrusted to it by the U.S. Constitution to simply come together and send their own electors to Washington. Now, this would be a violation of Georgia law, but this letter is the Department of Justice telling them they do have the constitutional authority to do it. It would be a violation of the will of the Georgia voters and the will of the American people. It would mean the Department of Justice was literally signing on to the coup attempt in its official capacity. It would be a green light for mayhem. And we know from Deputy Attorney General Richard Donoghue's contemporaneous notes released last week that Trump was already pressuring acting Attorney General Rosen and Donoghue, literally telling them, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. We know Trump is pressuring the Republican Georgia Secretary of State, famously telling him, quote, I just want to find 11,780 votes. But his key ally in this is this guy, Jeffrey Clark, this previously anonymous functionary, a guy that no one really knows, but who is effectively plotting a coup with the president. Okay, so then Rosen and Donoghue get this letter. They think, oh, no, they refuse to sign the letter. Well, get this. The New York Times reports that Clark meets with Trump on his own and then informed Mr. Rosen, the acting attorney general, the president intended to replace Rosen with Clark, who could then try to stop Congress from certifying the Electoral College results. Clark apparently convincing Trump to make him the attorney general so he could sign that letter. And again, that letter being issued by the Department of Justice in an act that very likely would have precipitated a crisis from which the country may not have recovered. It would have put inordinate pressure on the Republicans of the Georgia General Assembly, again, dominated by Republicans, a green light from the DOJ. And they may very well have gone ahead, appointed their own electors, pledged to Trump, sent them to Washington. Maybe other states would have followed suit. It would have thrown us into a frenzy, a suddenly contested election, even though there was nothing to contest. It was a very clear electoral result. One man won and one man lost. The Times reports that Donahue convened a late afternoon call with the department's remaining senior leaders, laying out Mr. Clark's efforts to replace Mr. Rosen. Should Mr. Rosen be fired, they all agreed to resign en masse. When presented with that ultimatum, Trump seemed somewhat swayed by the idea that firing Mr. Rosen would trigger not only chaos at the Justice Department, but also congressional investigations and possibly recriminations from other Republicans and distract attention from his efforts to overturn the election results. And so he backed off, and the gun stayed holstered. But we were this close to a world where the Attorney General of the United States, Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Clark, publicly released that letter. And the man who came that close to doing that, to committing that grievous act, Jeffrey Clark, is, just out in the world, chilling, probably going to nice dinners, probably makes good income. Actually got a new job. He landed a job as the chief of litigation and director of strategy at the right-wing New Civil Liberties Alliance. Those are all his colleagues right there. They should be very proud they work with him. They do things like sue universities for mandating vaccines, and they try to go to court to get the moratorium on evictions removed. Good folks. Come to think of it, it makes you wonder what the hiring practices are at the New Civil Liberties Alliance. How they all feel in the office. Well, then maybe they're not in the office about this guy who's apparently willing to assassinate American democracy. And he can get a job after a lot of this had already been publicly reported. This man who plotted with the president to destroy our form of government, to steal the presidency and overturn an election, and to essentially install Donald Trump as a tyrant against the will of the people. That man who did that. The reason a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, concussing policemen and beating them with their own weapons, is because the official mechanisms of power failed Trump, thanks to men like Jeffrey Rosen. You got to hand it to him. Richard Donahue. They did the right thing. But if the Department of Justice sends that letter and the Georgia General Assembly calls a special session, sends a slate of electors for Donald Trump to Washington, well, then they wouldn't have needed the mob. The man who colluded with Donald Trump on this coup should be disbarred. No one should ever hire him again. He should face eternal public shaming, Jeffrey Clark. It is insane to let this man, Jeffrey Clark, get anywhere near any institution in this country that matters at all. He aimed a nuclear weapon at the United States of America's democracy. There have been little to no consequences for anyone involved in this whole disgusting and sordid affair, and unless there are, they're going to try again. They came very close last time.